Hi, hello, my name's Ollie Bliss and this is my channel Bookdraw. For those who don't know, I enjoy looking at queer fiction and occasionally I create images out of it. Today I am actually doing a wrap-up. This is long overdue. I have not done a wrap-up since June, so I'm overdue. But I have been wanting to do this for quite some time, and it's become one of those tasks which have kind of escalated in your mind where you're like, I really should do that, and then it becomes paralyzing because you've got so many different bits to talk about. But I have had done a heap of reading recently, and they have been really good reads as well. So I've been wanting to kind of share that with you, and I feel like I'm not going to probably do it justice because I'm going to probably talk a little bit quicker about stuff just to make the video not ridiculously huge. So starting with Abid and Khorram, Darius the Great is not okay. So this is a kid called Darius who is going over from the States, and he's taking his first trip over to Iran. Now Darius is actually quite an introverted, shy sort of character who looks around the people around him from a very negative point of view, and he feels kind of constantly under threat by other people around him, and he really lacks confidence, and he's quite insecure in his character. But the way in which that's described is really relatable and vivid. I mean, it's certainly something I can identify with from the perspective of having those feelings as a younger guy, and wishing that I had a book like this to make you feel like those feelings were okay, and that actually there are strategies and ways forward which you can help yourself to move out of that. The other side of this is that Darius suffers from depression, and so going from the States where there is a different kind of understanding around people's relationship with medication and what it is to be someone who is suffering from depression, and going over into Iran, which has a very different mindset and isn't very accepting towards medical conditions like that of the mind. And there's a more dismissive kind of attitude towards it where you basically need to kind of buck up and just get on with it, really. When Darius first arrives there, he meets up with Sohrab, and Sohrab takes him under his wing and basically takes him around to see the sights. He also introduces him to his friends, but there is a lot of insecurity around his identity and him engaging with this kind of friendship group. And you see him kind of go through these false starts of like not feeling comfortable and feeling like he is someone quite separate and foreign in that situation. I think this would be a great sort of year 7 grade read in terms of just introducing you to broader notions of identity and sexuality and mental health. It's got a lot that is in there, but it's also got some really great details around the relationship with the family and those bonds, and what that all means in terms of him coming over from the States and going over into Iran. It's really, really rich as a read, but it's also quite a short, gentle one as well. So the next one which I want to talk about is the Stonewall Reader, which has been edited by the New York Library, and it has a foreword from Edmund White. This was a book which I did as a buddy read with Greg over from Supposedly Fun. And it was an absolute delight to do it as a buddy read with him. It made the entire experience so much more interesting and in depth, and I think the pair of us really got a lot out of the whole process of going through something which would have probably been quite a heavy read because it's non-fiction had we had done it by ourselves. But actually having someone else to read alongside the material, and also someone who also grew up with a queer lens and has that perspective, we're really able to bounce off of each other and gain some insights about each other and what happened to us both as we were growing up and how that has really changed over the years. The Stonewall event happened in 1969, and we're just celebrating a big anniversary for it. So it felt really appropriate to be reading it at this time. But the book is actually a collection of excerpts from different books, and it's taken into 3 parts. So at the first section, it's events which occurred prior to Stonewall, and then you've got a section which is dedicated to during Stonewall, and then the third part is kind of after Stonewall. And I think the pair of us kind of agreed that latter element, which was looking at the post-Stonewall, really kind of unraveled in itself, which is a real shame, because there is so many things which have happened which have been really, really big for LGBTQIA rights in the world, which have really leapfrogged from that aspect. And what I was saying to Greg is that here over in the UK, we even have an organisation called Stonewall in dedication to those events. So in terms of the rippling effect that those riots had back in 1969, still continue to empower people today. That said, this book is also really, really tricky to read because it will introduce you to so many other voices that neither of us had come across, I don't think. And it's racked up my TBR potential for the future. And it's one of those books which I'm going to want to refer back to in order to kind of go, oh yeah, who else did I want to read on this list? And I did come away from that book with heaps of other books that I intend to read. And for example, I'm currently reading Zami, which is by Audre Lorde. And that was because it was such a compelling, interesting style of writing that made me want to pick that book up. That said, we also did it in two different ways. So I did it as an audio read, and Greg did it as an actual book. And for me, like in terms of having it as an audio read was really rich, because there are sections which are done through interviews, and those interviews are verbatim. So through the process of reading, Greg did say some of the bits kind of jarred a bit because of there was no kind of flow in the narrative, whereas when you're listening to it, you're really getting a sense of the people who were a part of that time.
Hey, what do you say? Pass the bill or you'll pay.
Why are you here today?
Darling, I want my gay rights now.
So that for me was just like a really nice touch to have a different range of those voices. But it was just a bit of a shame towards the end that it just kind of like it just ended, and it didn't really kind of conclude itself. It literally was a discussion point as a kind of miscellaneous chapter at the end, and there was nothing to really kind of tie it together or to reflect on those key events and where we have come. So I felt like that was a bit of a missed opportunity, but I guess it also keeps it open in the fact that like we are still struggling with rights internationally, and there is room for improvement for sure. But to do it with Greg was a real blessing in terms of actually being able to share some of who he is in terms of what things have shaped him, and having the opportunity to really pause and reflect on the things that have shaped me as an individual as well. It was just a really cool process to go through. But also just to say a big thank you to Greg on an individual basis. It was a real pleasure to read with you. So the next one which I want to discuss is Travis Bagwell's Awaken Online, the next installment, which is Dominion. Wasn't it? Yeah, it was. Dominion, which was a real pleasure to read. But when I was actually reflecting on it comparatively to the rest of the series, so this should also caveat and say this is the fourth installment in terms of the main body of the books. It actually has, I think it's got 3 other, maybe even 4 side plots which are offshoots from the main thrust of the story, but I've not gone on those side missions. I've literally just gone through the main process of the story. But in terms of Awaken Online itself, so it's got Jason, Riley and Frank, and these are 3 friends who hang out in this online world called Awaken Online. And Jason has built up a sense of infamy by playing a character who is a bit of a nemesis in that particular world. He is a necromancer, and he has built really radically and quickly this real empire around him. And I don't want to spoil the events which have occurred across the 3, but so he's been through some serious trials in terms of what's been happening in the real world, but also what's been happening in his virtual world in Awaken Online. He's looking out for his Twilight Throne empire, and he's constantly having to think about the potential threats that are around him and building these strategies to help ensure that he has dominance over his realm. But this part is like, it's grown in its complexity, and it like is permeating between the real world and this online world, and it's beginning to draw out these kind of ethical questions, which I'm really enjoying, because it kind of stipulates a future potential of where we could go. And I don't want to spoil too many things. What I would say in some of the things which I didn't like as much with this particular one is that, one, it does go into greater depth in the logistics of the world in terms of it being a online world and how they maintain that, and at times I felt like it didn't necessarily need to go into that depth. The other thing is that a key character who I really enjoyed in the previous one, ELiza, you don't really see too much of her, and in this book she ends up spending the majority of her time just creating potions. And for me, I was kind of like, is that something that you would really want to spend your free time doing, going off into this virtual world and producing potions for this other player, and that's your gaming experience? And I didn't necessarily feel that element was too believable. But the thing with this scale of this whole Awaken Online is it's huge, and it's the type of place that you just want to keep on being a part of. It feels like you are breathing in a different world and lapping up a different experience, and I love being taken away and transported by a book, and this totally does that for you, and it's just such a great rich adventure. The next one, which I really want to gush about, is Elif Shafak's Three Daughters of Eve. This is a book which I picked up prior going to the Bradford Literature Festival, because I had the intention of going to one of her talks, and because of the move and everything, and having to be here when we were selling the house, I wasn't able to attend her talk in the end, but I still read Three Daughters of Eve in preparation for attending her talk, and oh my god, I wish like I had just laid off all the other plans and just gone and seen her talk. So the premise of the book is that you are following Perry, who's this woman who has this mugging right at the start of the book, and out tips this picture of her and her three friends and this old university professor, and she starts reflecting on her past. And so you've got these events which are happening in the course of her personal history alongside this evening that she's going along towards, and it's that kind of blurring between those two elements. It is just beautifully told as a story, for one, but what I really like about this particular story is there is this sense of spiritual questioning, which I completely and utterly identify with. I love this notion of this person who is really trying to explore their understanding of their faith and their curiosity about what spirituality is, but she doesn't really present a conclusion or a definitive dogmatic view, but she challenges and she provokes inquiry into all aspects of religion. So the story focuses Perry growing up over in Istanbul, and then she later, as a university student, comes over to England. And you've got this kind of focus on different aspects of her life, and how she has parents who have polarizing views around religion and faith and what it means to be here in the world. And that shapes her identity. She then goes over to England, and she's being challenged further by these other people around her to really explore and question what faith is all about, and in terms of the structures of society and what makes things beautiful. And it's just like, it's got so many different elements which it's unpacking, but it's not fully unpacking them, it's just presenting them in different ways. So it's just kind of saying, well, what about this? And have you thought about that? And it just makes you think more deeply about the world around you. And for me, those are the type of things which I really love and enjoy when I'm reading a book. And she gives room for conversation. She isn't being dogmatic in her approach at all. And I think that really breathes life to the whole book, and it just makes you kind of have the opportunity to wander a bit. So I'm really excited for her next book, which I did purchase while I was over at Bradford Literature Festival, because I just really enjoyed her style and the conversational tone to the way she writes. It made it just like a delight to go consume, and it just made me want to hang out with her. She sounds like the coolest individual.
My name is Elif Shafak. I'm an author. I'm a storyteller. My most recent novel is called 10 Minutes, 38 Seconds in the Strange World. I became very interested in these series of scientific studies that show after the moment of death, after the heart has stopped beating, the human brain continues to function, to work for another few minutes. Particularly in Canada, in an intensive care unit, doctors have observed persistent brain activity in patients that had just passed away. So to me as an author, that was intriguing, fascinating, and I kept thinking, what happens in the human brain in that limited amount of time? If we remember, what do we remember of a whole life? What remains? The bad things or the good things? And my character, at the very beginning of the novel, we know, actually the first two words in this novel are the end. That's how the story begins. So right away we know that the main character in this book, and her name is Layla, she's dead. She's a sex worker in Istanbul. She's been brutally killed, and her body has been dumped in a garbage bin. And as I was writing that part, I also remembered a real event that took place in Istanbul. A few years ago, a transgender sex worker was killed in this way, and her body had been dumped in a garbage bin, like the final insult. So I remembered her story as I was writing my fictional character's story. And right away we know that Layla is dead, her heart has stopped beating, but her brain is still working. Those are the first pages of the story, and as she remembers minute by minute by minute her past, during those 10 minutes 38 seconds, we travel, as readers, we travel into her story, but also into the story of a country and the Middle East, but always told through the eyes of outcasts.
But yeah, I don't know if this book in particular will be for everyone, but for people who have kind of a spiritual side to them or a questioning side, I think you'll really get a lot out of the questions that she proposes within this book. So I've decided to split this video up into two because I will be ranting for so long that this will just be an endless video if I don't. So I will upload these in relative succession to each other so that if you want to see and hear all the books which I've read, you'll be able to dissect them as soon as possible and enjoy them with me, because I've just had an amazing time with my reads and I do have things I want to say. So I hope you enjoy.